No, I don't ski. I like the winter and I like the cold, but you'll never catch me skiing. Too dangerous. Plus, you gotta move. Steve Weiner here from GetRubix.com, and this week, before we release the V3 of the Intune device tenant migration solution, need a better name for that. Want to go over what would be very helpful, I think, is some tenant prep for those of you who are going to try this in production regarding the user identities. No skiing. Did someone ask you to ski? So why are we talking about this? Okay, so one of the things we have to do is when we move the device from one Intune tenant to another, we have to reset the primary user. Now, to date, we've been accomplishing this by essentially querying the current new user on the machine, and we get that from a local registry value, and we get the last logged on display name, and we invoke a REST method to the graph to determine we're basically looking for a user object that has a display name equal to the one we're pulling out. The problem is this is based on a regular expression. This is based on, the user's name, and it's not as explicit as we would like it to be. So one idea that I've floated around with some of the folks who are testing this and think it might ultimately be a good solution is to use kind of a mapping attribute. So my team works on moving devices, but for those of us who are working on migrating the email, migrating SharePoint data, and ultimately the users, this would be an interesting thing. So I want to show you. I have two. I don't even know why I closed that window. So I have this is Bob Freeman in my Rubik's Dev tenant, and then I also have Bob Freeman in my Steve Capacity tenant, which is the target tenant, and they are. Let's see if we can do a little side by side here. There we go. So they're pretty much the same. Obviously, they're different objects. They're different users and different tenants. Rubik's Dev, Steve Capacity. So how do we connect these from the endpoint? So one thing I've done is in the Graph Explorer. Oh, I'm gonna have to make this bigger again. I've went ahead and here, let me actually query this is the user object. If we don't know the object, that's okay. We can simply do it this way, the full UPN, and it's going to give us what we want. So that's the Rubik's Dev Bob Freeman. And if we look all the way down to essentially the wildcards here, I'll call them, they're called on-premises extension attributes. And these are a bunch of values that we can essentially write to and do what we want with. Now, some of you may be using these for different things, right? Whether it's custom pieces of the organization you want to add here, different department info. But I took the one that's kind of square in the middle, attribute 7, and I created a GUID, just a normal PowerShell unique GUID, and I added that to attribute 7. I then went to the Steve Capacity tenant and did the exact same thing. So take a look at this. This is Bob Freeman at Steve Capacity, and we have that same attribute 7. So you see where I'm going with this. When you're working on migrating the identities, you add the attribute, and then when you migrate over, you make sure you migrate that attribute. This will be the same, even though it's a different user object and a different tenant. Now, if the PC can get this attribute first, later when we do the lookup in the new tenant, we could just look for that attribute. It's almost like we're creating a second Azure AD or Entra ID user attribute that stays persistent between the two. So if I know my user is Bob Freeman at rubixdev.com, I'm going to make a graph call. So I'm going to say the object is equal to invoke REST method get URI is https graph.microsoft.com/beta/users/user headers. Okay, so what did that return? That should return the object, and it did. So now what I can do is I can say my attribute is equal to the object dot on premises extension attributes. We're looking for attribute 7. So that should be my GUID. Just gonna run that line. And that's my GUID. So now that I have that, I can write that to the registry of the device so that I can retrieve it later. All right, so let's put all this together. PowerShell script. I have my authentication piece up there with my client and secret. So all I'm going to do now is start putting this together. So the first thing we got to do, as always, is we have to get the active user SID of the machine because we don't know what that is. And that'll in turn get us the full UPN object. So now that we have the SID, we need to get the full UPN. And remember, if it seems like we're, taking a roundabout way to do this, is because if we're deploying this from Intune, it's running a system. We have to be cognizant of that. So the reg path is HKLM, software, Microsoft, identity store, cache. We want the user SID, identity cache, user SID again. Okay. And our UPN is going to be get item property value, path is reg path, and the name is username. So that'll give us the full UPN. Now we query it. Yep, don't know what that was. User object equals invoke rest method. Method is get. URI is https graph.microsoft.com/beta/users/UPN is what we want. Headers are headers. Okay. Now that we have the user object, we just need that attribute. So the attribute is the user object on, so that'll be object on premises extension attributes extension 7. Is that what we did? On premise extension attributes extension attribute 7. Extension attribute 7. So that attribute number, that's going to be our GUID. So now we just got to write that back. So we can do reg add HKLM software. We're going to create a path for Intune migration. You'll see a lot more of that in the V3. We're using the registry a lot. Extension attribute. And that will be a reg sc, the attribute f out host. Okay, so what is that going to look like in the registry? Well, we know we got the attribute. So here's what we'll do. Reg exe, let's put this into practice. Add HKLM software Intune migration extension attribute. Type is reg string. D is the data is attribute, and we'll force and out host. Yep. Let's give that a shot. Okay, so I'm going to open up the registry on this box. HKL software Intune migration. Check it out. Now I have my very own path for the extension attribute. What that means is on the flip side, when I ultimately go back to set that user, Okay. Instead of looking for a user that has a similar name, right? A name like the last login display name, we'll be able to get the extension attribute and filter for extension attribute 7 equals that attribute, and that will have the exact match of the new object. So yeah, we're gonna build that into some revisions coming up. Again, you have to make sure that's set beforehand in both tenants. And it's pretty easy to do, but that's going to probably work into your overall migration strategy. This doesn't really pertain to what we're doing in the solution as a whole from a technical perspective. This is more of a way we can address a very common problem, which, I've been showing you migrations in my test tenants. I have 7 to 8 identities. If you have hundreds or thousands of identities in your organization, more than likely first and last names could duplicate, folks' name could change, right? They can be similar. And if we're just going off of the expression of the name, we could ultimately run into issues. So by having the GUID as the custom extension attribute, you're going to be able to get an exact match between the two tenants. It's kind of like we're using the client registry as glue. So hopefully this was helpful. I'm going to upload a sample of the script we use to grab that and write it to the registry. And I will also make a version of the set primary user that can take advantage of that as well. And those will be available in the GitHub repo. Stop by the Discord. Let me know what you think. Hopefully that solves some things. Later.
1, 2, 3.